Hi, welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, there's been a bit of a media storm raging over the last week or so about a guy by the name of Andrew Judd. Andrew Judd is the outgoing mayor of a small town in the North Island of New Zealand called New Plymouth. And if you had read this media coverage, you would think that the town of New Plymouth was basically a racist enclave with a whole lot of white supremacists in charge who were committed to suppressing the Māori voice and or at the very least denying the local Māori people a chance to have their voice heard on the local council and being part of the governance structures. So I read the articles and I watched some of the coverage and I thought, this is really terrible. This town's full of racists. How could this be happening? Then as I read more and more, I started to think, hold on a minute, something doesn't quite ring true here. I don't feel like I'm getting the full facts. And so I decided to do a bit more reading and researched and went back a bit further and looked at other media coverage from the last couple of years emanating from this town of New Plymouth. And sure enough, there is more of a backstory that the media hasn't told us here that's actually kind of important. So first of all, it wasn't until I went back and looked at these other articles that I actually discovered that New Plymouth, approximately not even 2 years ago, the City Council put forward a proposition that there should be a special seat on the local governing council just for Māori, and that special seat should be passed into legislation. So the proposal was made, they voted on it, and they passed it into legislation. It became law. So all of a sudden I realised all these claims that I was reading and these strong suggestions that the people of New Plymouth are not interested in having Māori representation or not allowing Māori representation, well, they actually weren't true because the City Council had voted and passed this very legislation not less than 2 years ago. So that was the first thing. I was like, hold on a minute, because none of the coverage had mentioned that fact. The other thing I discovered was that there's a bit more to Andrew Judd's unpopularity than what the current media coverage is implying. The current media coverage has basically suggested that what happened was Andrew Judd one day said, hey, I actually think we need Māori representation on the local council. And then all of a sudden, effectively, the vast majority of people living in New Plymouth just turned on him and have been abusing him and calling him names and all sorts of stuff. And basically, like I said, it makes it sound like there's some sort of white KKK enclave of racists who want to suppress people who are not white in their district. Well, it turns out that's kind of not actually what happened. What actually happened was about 2 years ago, Andrew Judd put forward the proposal that 50% of council seats on every council in New Zealand, so 50% of city council seats, the governing city council, should be Māori seats, up to 50% of them. And then he said that he believed that the Treaty of Waitangi mandated this. Now, I'm a firm believer in Māori representation. I actually think it's hugely important and it should happen. However, I also would dispute the claim that he's making that the Treaty of Waitangi demands that we have 50% of all seats on city councils given to Māori. Look, I stand in awe of the experts on the treaty and I'm prepared to be corrected by those, but my limited understanding of the Treaty of Waitangi is that in actual fact it's about collaborative governance which respects the tangata whenua, the people of the land, respects their heritage, their culture. There is a collaboration and a participation that is shared in the governance and the ongoing, ownership and control and administration of the resources and the land and the way laws and other things are made. That's a very sort of my loose layman's sort of interpretation of what I understand the treaty. Nowhere do I understand the treaty to actually mandate that there must be a certain number of seats on city councils, etc., or that you must meet a certain requirement in order to carry out that governance. Now, clearly this really wasn't something the signers of the treaty even envisaged when they signed it, because democratically elected city councils were not a thing when this treaty was put into place. So in this country, clearly it's not supported by the treaty. And also, I actually have a problem with the suggestion that 50% of democratically elected seats should be given exclusively to one particular race or nationality. I actually have a problem with that concept. And I can see why and I can understand the argument that people would make and why they would get upset about the fact that their mayor was suggesting that all of a sudden 50% of the local governing council seats should not be available for the members of the general public to be elected for. I can understand why people would get upset about that. I actually kind of think to me, I don't support that idea for a second, because first of all, why does it have to, he said up to 50%, so why does it have to be just 50%? I wouldn't have a problem if 100% of my city council seats, Māori people were elected to sit in 100% of the seats. So why is it just 50%? And I also think there's a problem with any sort of governance body where you say, right, we'll have 50% of the seats, or however many percentages, set aside for this group, and then there'll be another group here and another group here. And in fact, the more I think about it, the more it comes across to me as almost like segregating people into categories in a very unnatural and unhelpful kind of way. What I'd much rather have is a city council or a governing body where all of the elected members, regardless of their race, their gender, regardless of their religious beliefs or their personal views on economics or anything else, all of them have a shared understanding that they are all there to serve the common good of every person in their district, that they are there to serve and to govern the needs of all people, not just their particular race group or their particular religious group or their particular gender. But segregating people into special seats and splitting the council 50-50, to me actually seems to be further entrenching a mentality of, right, you guys over there are the Māoris and you look after the Māori issues, and we're over here, we're the Whiteys, and we'll represent and look after the Whiteys. That's not, I don't think, how governance should be done. It should be that everyone has ownership for everyone else that they're supposed to be serving in governance, not just for their particular interests or ideology or grouping. And I don't think it's moving New Zealand forward and helping us to take ownership for European New Zealanders to actually take more ownership, because this is an issue, of our Māori heritage, which is part of our heritage. And to me, segregating councils like that actually isn't encouraging European New Zealanders to embrace their heritage more. In fact, it's really just promoting more of the segregation. Like I said, I am firmly committed to Māori representation in governance. I believe it's essential and it must happen. But at the same time, I can also understand why people were upset with the proposals that were made in New Plymouth. And I'm also kind of really annoyed and frustrated that the media coverage hasn't really been totally honest and balanced on this issue. And it hasn't really encouraged what is a very important discussion that should be taking place. Instead, it's creating a situation where the focus is really on one particular person, their personality, rather than the actual issue. We really should be talking about the issue of Māori representation, and instead we're not. We're talking about whether or not New Plymouth is a racist town. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily.